Time to talk Ohio State football here at MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. We bring you Ohio State Buckeyes live each and every week. It's important that you subscribe to the channel, turn on the notifications, turn on the bell on the front page of the channel. That way you know when we are going live with Ohio State football talk. We've got a number of people in play that have different schedules and can't necessarily lock down at the same day, the same time each and every week. So this is the time for Steve Hellwagon and myself to get together. We usually bring in Kevin Noon, Claire Crawford, Tony Gerdeman as well. But it's Steve and I with some Buckeyes chat today right here at MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. So bring your comments and your questions to the live chat, and I will pass them on to Steve. And who knows, I may have something to say myself. Steve, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. What's going on?
Not too much. And, of course, you can join Steve there at Bucknuts, the 247 Sports platform for Ohio State football. So we saw this Tennessee Titans defense and the entire team make it all the way to the AFC Championship game, which was quite the surprise, and beat the top two seeds in the AFC playoffs in that route to Kansas City. But Kerry Combs now moves on from the Tennessee Titans of the NFL as defensive backs coach. Come on back to Ohio State as a defensive coordinator, Steve.
Yeah, this was something that's obviously been in the works ever since Jeff Hafley left Ohio State in mid-December. I mean, he stayed through the bowl game, obviously, but Jeff Hafley left Ohio State to head off to Boston College. I think that Kerry Combs is a guy that Ryan Day wanted to bring back to Ohio State. They worked together for one season on the Ohio State staff, and from that point on, it was obvious that he moved on to the National Football League with the Tennessee Titans, and then 2 seasons there working with Mike Vrabel, who Kerry Combs had worked with Mike Vrabel for the first year, I believe, under Urban Meyer. First or second year, 2012, 2013, I guess they worked together. And then Mike Vrabel, when he took over as the head coach of the Tennessee Titans 2 years ago, he sought out Kerry Combs. And here's Kerry Combs. You got to understand, he's mid to late 50s right now. He'd been an outstanding high school head coach, won a state championship at Cincinnati Colerain back around 2005, I guess. Became an assistant coach at Cincinnati. I want to say he was there under Brian Kelly and had the opportunity to go with him to Notre Dame when Brian Kelly left, but decided to stay at Cincinnati and remained there. And then came to Ohio State with Urban Meyer in 2012 as a member of Urban Meyer's first staff. So, he has kind of made that gradual move, was a college assistant coach in the one area, the one level of football that he had never coached at was the National Football League. And he wanted to get that experience and see what that at the highest level was all about. And obviously they went into Tennessee. They inherited a playoff team from the year before Vrabel was there. And then obviously this year went all the way to the Final Four, the NFL, the AFC Championship, and made a strong run to try and get to the Super Bowl. This was something that has been in the works at Ohio State for quite a while. To get Kerry Combs to come back, and Ryan Day, as I said, worked alongside him in his first year at Ohio State. That would have been 3 years ago, and he knew when Jeff Hafley left that he wanted to bring Kerry Combs back any way he could. They came up with a package. One, he has a title of defensive coordinator, something that he will share, obviously, with Greg Madison. I'm having a hard time talking today. And we can get into maybe what that dynamic will look like. But financially as well, they came up with a package that will pay him $1.2 million, believed to be the second highest assistant coach in OSU history. I think Greg Schiano may have made $1.5 million as the defensive coordinator there in 2017. And so we will see, obviously, how that all works out. I think Greg Madison, also the defensive coordinator, will make 1.1, or at least this past year he made 1.1 million, plus all kinds of money in bonuses for these guys. We think that they won the Big Ten, won the division, won the Big Ten championship, and put a team into the playoff. 3 huge thresholds that pay out extra money on the bonus structure, I think, for guys contracted at Ohio State. So very interesting to see how it all shakes out. And in his speech, Mike Vrabel said that he did not want to stand in Kerry Combs' way if he had somewhere or something that he wanted to do to continue his coaching career. Said he understood fully and appreciated everything he had done for him. The players with the Titans were big with testimonials for him on the way out the door as well. So he's coming back to Ohio State. The unique thing is, Mark, he helped recruit some of the older defensive backs, like Amir Reep is still at Ohio State. He'll be a senior. Marcus Williamson, Jason Wint, those are the 3 seniors in the secondary, and I'd assume Kerry Combs had a hand in recruiting them. And the other thing to think about is just how great he was and could be as a recruiter. He would go into places like Michigan, which is a very fertile recruiting ground for Ohio State, and help them land different players. And obviously with his time at Coleraine High School in Cincinnati, Ohio, he was invaluable recruiting Southwest Ohio, Dayton, Cincinnati, and all the high schools in between. Very invaluable in recruiting that area. And that's been a tremendous area. We saw this year in 2020, Ohio State signed 5 or 6 guys out of Cincinnati. So Kerry Combs will be in those high schools where he is well known, and I'm sure be welcomed with open arms again down the Queen City. So really, this is a win-win-win, I think, for Ryan Day to get a guy who's a good technician. Just that they made a comment that I think he had 6 starting cornerbacks in his previous tenure at Ohio State, and all of them ended up in the National Football League. And then obviously his success in the NFL goes without saying, and now he'll get the challenge along with Greg Madison in coordinating the defense.
I would argue that it's currently DBU. That debate is made from time to time, and certainly LSU and Florida are right there. And historically, it's a enormous debate that could be waged for hours and hours. But currently, right now, when we're talking currently, I mean the last 5 years or so, my goodness, the Ohio State talent moving on to the NFL has been just amazing. Yeah. You brought up Kerry Combs' boss, or latest boss, being Mike Vrabel. It's just astounding what he's accomplished at the NFL level. I don't know if you saw this coming, Steve, but of course, he was a great defensive lineman for the Buckeyes, who played for a long time in the NFL from 1997 through 2010. So we're talking about an NFL player as recently as 2010, won multiple Super Bowls as a player with the Patriots, started out his coaching career there at Ohio State, coming back home to coach the linebackers for the Buckeyes in that 2011 season under Luke Fickell, staying there for a couple more years under Urban Meyer as defensive line coach, then moved on to the NFL, cut his teeth with the Houston Texans as linebackers coach, then defensive coordinator. And here just a 1 year, basically 2 seasons after being a defensive coordinator in the NFL as a head coach, taking that same Tennessee Titans team now to the brink of a Super Bowl. Did you see this kind of career path for Mike Vrabel? Did you expect him? Did you see that type of acumen as a future NFL head coach?
That is really interesting, and it's been a meteoric rise in some respects for him. I go back with him. I became a full-time reporter on Ohio State in 1995. So for his last 2 seasons as a full-time player there at Ohio State, he was an All-American both years in 95 and 96, and was a high draft pick, I think, by Pittsburgh Steelers. Not sure if first round or second round, but started out there with Bill Cowher. And they kind of miscast him as a player with the Steelers. And it's been, I mean, that's over 2 decades ago for me to try and rehash that, but maybe as an outside linebacker, whereas he needed to be more a down lineman, I guess. I'm not sure, but he latched on with New England right at the beginning of their great dynasty with Tom Brady coming in there. And obviously they won the Super Bowl after, I believe it was the 2001 season, I think was their first one. And he was there through, probably the next decade, as you outlined, and a couple more Super Bowl appearances and whatever else. He's got some kind of a stat where he's caught touchdown passes, in playoff games, the Super Bowls, and he has like 7 or 8 career catches, and most all of them were for touchdowns on the goal line, where he'd come in and declare himself eligible as an extra blocker, coming, theoretically coming in to play tight end on the goal line. They would never throw the ball to a defensive end, and Tom Brady did over and over and over and over, and nobody ever caught on to it. I think he made the Pro Bowl once or twice in his time with the Patriots, and obviously learned so much at the foot of Bill Belichick and some of the other guys. Romeo Crennel would have been there at times as well, and different people that he played for and learned different things from. And Bill O'Brien was there, obviously, at times with the Patriots. And so when it came about in 2011, it was Luke Fickell took over as the head coach at Ohio State after Jim Tressel's resignation in May of 2011. And he was looking for people to fill out his staff. And Mike Vrabel, as we said, had just kind of wrapped up his playing career. And he and Luke Fickell are, I don't know if I think you could call them best friends. They have a group of people that all played together: Ryan Miller, Luke Fickell, Matt Finkus, Mike Vrabel, Greg Belisari may have been part of that group as well. 4 or 5 of them who were just thick as thieves, during their time together at Ohio State, and maintained those bonds and those relationships as time went on. So here's Luke Fickell gets elevated to the head coaching position out of nowhere in May of 2011. And Mike Vrabel is back living in Columbus. I think he had a home on the north side of Columbus at the time, and it was just an obvious thing. He wanted to get into coaching. His friend needed all the allies he could possibly get to stand by his side there. And here's Vrabel, man's man, perfect, just a perfect guy to fit in there. And so they worked together for a year. Then, of course, Urban Meyer is hired as the permanent head coach after that. And Urban Meyer retained both Fickell and Vrabel. They were together for a year. And then at the end of that first year with Urban, first or second year in 2013, I guess it would have been his second year. I guess he worked for Urban for 2 years. Bill O'Brien had left Penn State and was going to become the new head coach of the Houston Texans. And he saw what Mike Vrabel had done in 3 years as a college assistant and called him up to the big leagues, to the National Football League. And, Vrabel had some good players, obviously at Ohio State early in that run, and was there at the beginning for Joey Bosa, as I recall. And there's even one thing where, of course, he was helping to recruit Nick Bosa a couple years out, out of Florida to join. He didn't come along, obviously, till later on. But so at any rate, he goes to work with Houston. And, here's Tennessee needs a coach several years later. And, of course, they go head-to-head quite a bit. So those coaching ties, or however he was brought in to as the replacement in Tennessee. And now 2 years in, he's gotten a team deep in the playoffs from a wild card spot. And, they had to hustle, had to win their last game of the regular season just to get in. And people at Ohio State were, I'm sure privately hoping they would have lost that week so that Kerry Combs could have been free to come to Ohio State. And it didn't work out. Not only that, they won 2 more games after that and got deep into this thing. But now Kerry Combs at Ohio State. I'm sure once, again, we don't have a firm idea on the timeline. Maybe tomorrow we'll get a better idea. They announced him yesterday officially, finally, the worst kept secret in town. But whether he's out on the road already recruiting, we don't know just yet, but he'll be out there, as he liked to say, planting the flag sooner rather than later, and has that experience now of what it takes to coach defensive backs in the National Football League as well.
This is just not the reason. This is just one of the reasons why we bring Steve on the show.
I got all these crazy stories. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. We can talk the stats. We can talk facts and bio. We can talk about the games that we watch on television, but Steve brings that layer or 2 or 3 or 12 that we can't get to otherwise with his advanced knowledge of Ohio State football behind the scenes. So great stories there on Mike Vrabel. Cheryl in the live chat is asking whether Combs will be calling up in the booth for the 2020 season. Do you have any idea on that one?
That's a great question. I think Hafley and Madison were sitting side by side, and the way it's kind of been portrayed, I know that one of the reports we had was that Madison will probably take the wheel when it's what they deem to be a running situation for the opponent, maybe first down or second and short. I don't know. And he'll call a defensive set for that situation. And then when it's more of a passing situation, maybe Kerry Combs will take it then. I know that his energy on the sideline has always been one of his big things. And there was a game at Minnesota in 2014 where it was 15 degrees, and he tried to come out there on the sideline with the short sleeves on, like he always does. I remember when he was coaching at Coleraine High School in 2005, state championship. And it's kind of a tradition here in Ohio that first weekend in December, not only is it the state championship, but it's also one of the coldest weekends that we get every year. It seems that there's snow on the field for the state championship games that are usually played up in Canton and Massillon. And his team was playing up there, and it was snowing, and he had a short sleeve shirt on. So, yeah, it is what it is. But you think about it, you look at it, and it's going to be interesting to see what kind of an impact he has when he's at Ohio State, whether it'll be on the sideline or up in the box. His fingerprints will be all over whatever it is they do defensively.
Winter definitely comes quick, and it comes hard in the Midwest and in the Northeast when you could be at a football game in mid-November and it's 55 or 60 degrees, and 2 weeks later it's 12 degrees outside. For one of those playoff games in high school football, or for, those early December games. We got Steve Hellwagon on the line from Bucknuts, 247 Sports. Track him right there in his work on Ohio State football. It's like none other. We talk Ohio State football here each and every week with Steve and the rest of the panel. You got to lock in on the channel to get the notifications of knowing when we're going to hit the air. We're going to keep Steve around for just maybe a minute or two. If you've got any comments or questions in the live stream, please post them right there and I'll get to them. Otherwise, I'm looking at our last week's show, where in addition to the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments that we received during the actual live stream, we got 83 more comments after the video posted.
Wow.
Mama is saying, "Oh, Mark, love your channel by far, except when you become a homer. You are right about LSU defenders getting dragged around, but you have to be within reach of Etienne or Lawrence to at least try to get them down. I mean, Ohio State safeties got juked by a 6'6" quarterback. It got juked by a quarterback who isn't really rushed much this season. No question about that. What I was referring to is that Travis Etienne was hitting that second line of defense in the national championship game. This was early on before they got behind, and LSU defenders couldn't deal with him. They were bouncing off of him. They were getting dragged all over the field. And when we're just talking about defensive line and front seven play against the traditional run, I'm not talking about Trevor Lawrence breaking contain or those designed quarterback runs, or talking about Etienne in space. Just talking about him trying to run the ball against that Ohio State defensive front seven as a traditional running back. It just wasn't happening, and he was dragging nobody around the field.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, you think about Ohio State took away Etienne and his ability to run the ball in that game with their solid front seven. And as I've said, Clemson found ways to overcome that. And you just have to kind of tip your cap to Clemson. They found the holes in the Ohio State defense, whether it was Lawrence running the ball or the little jump past Etienne. The little things that they did were impressive, to say the least. So, give Clemson the credit. They earned the bragging rights. They're number 2 for 2019, and Ohio State's number 3, and that's the way it will go down in the history books, I guess. Everybody bowing down of course, to LSU and Joe Burrow. And, living here in Ohio, the people in Cincinnati are so nervous right now about Joe Burrow. And will he like us? Will he want to play for us? Will they pull a power play like the Mannings did, or the Elways did way back when, and say we're not going to play for your crappy team? I don't think that's going to happen, though. I think Joe's going to relish the opportunity to play in his home state of Ohio, and chance to resurrect a Bengals franchise. Honestly, they went to the playoffs 3 or 4 years in a row, not all that long ago. Just have really struggled to break through, and now in a very tough division with the Ravens and the Steelers and the somewhat surging Browns. So long way up from the bottom, I think, for Cincinnati, but it's going to be a lot of fun. And again, I'll be honest, very biased in Joe Burrow's favor, just from the time covering him. Great kid, and just wanted to see the Ohio guy. If a team from Louisiana is playing a team from South Carolina, I generally don't care one way or the other who would win the game, but I think most people here in Ohio were pulling for the purple, and that's how it played out. And I think he's going to be, it sounds like, a clear choice for the Bengals. Carolina, people have talked about them putting together a package of players or picks to try and get Burrow with that number 1 pick, just because of the Brady going there and that familiarity. But I think at the end of the day, I think the Bengals would be crazy not to take one on Joe.
Yeah, and Joe Burrow certainly had a lot of nice things to say and sentimental things to say about the state of Ohio and where he grew up in southeast Ohio and some of the impoverished areas, and him wanting to make it a better place. And certainly he could do so by playing for the Cincinnati Bengals and reaching out with a lot of the charity work that professional athletes have the opportunity to undertake. The Lee Smith channel, great show tonight, meaning last week. The only way Ohio State would have had a chance to beat LSU is if Fields and Dobbins were both 100%. Burrow still would have had the same kind of game because his long balls were accurate and there's no way of stopping him. To beat LSU, Ohio State would have had to been able to ground out the victory because LSU is not great at stopping the run. And certainly we covered much of that, but it would have been fascinating, of course, and would have loved to have seen the opportunity for the Buckeyes to play LSU. But I definitely think that the Fields knee was a big factor in the game against LSU or against Clemson. He just wasn't the same player. He became a pocket passer.
Yeah, I think when they got down in the red zone, had he been healthy, perhaps things would have been a little bit different, because they really struggled. It was kind of like their kryptonite when they got inside the 20-yard line. They just could not put the ball in the end zone. And very unfortunate. I mean, Dobbins was stopped on a shoestring tackle on one of the long runs at about the 15-yard line or whatever, or 10-yard line. And so a tough break, obviously, for Ohio State, and unable to put the ball in the end zone there. But again, give Clemson credit. They made one more play than Ohio State did, and they were able to pull that game out. And possibly a different outcome. I think Ohio State fans are excited about what the future will bring, and the chance to see Fields explore what he can do as a runner. I think that's going to be important in some of their bigger games. You go back to the J.T. Barrett experience, and you didn't see Ohio State utilize him a lot as a runner when they were playing outman teams. He stayed in the pocket and distributed the ball in those games. And then in the bigger games, you would see him carry the ball 15, even 20 times in some of the bigger games. And it was never with the idea he was going to break a big one. It was more to move the chains. It was 3rd and 7 quarterback draw type stuff or whatever. And I think that is a role in particular that Fields can take for Ohio State in 2020 if his knee comes back, which it Coach Day was not all that clear whether or not Fields had some type of a scope procedure before he played against Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game. He was injured 2 weeks earlier against Penn State, and then came back and obviously played against Michigan, gutted it out, and it was kind of left unsaid whether or not he underwent a procedure at that point. But again, whether a cleanup is necessary or where things stand, we'll have to wait and see.
Hey, Steve, technically, this Ohio State team is not going to be ranked among the great Ohio State teams of all time by most people because they did not win the national championship. And that's typically where people start, just to line up the national champions and try to determine who the best teams are. I don't do it that way because I try to look at it a little bit deeper than that to say, yes, this team maybe should have won the national championship, could have if things would have been different, and just look at it a little bit, take a deeper dive into what could have happened. Have you ever tried to, with your immense backlog of Ohio State history and your analysis of the various teams, have you ever tried to put together a list of the greatest teams of all time at Ohio State, and where would you slot this team?
Yeah, I think you can always try and do that. You think about the modern era. When did it begin? With the AP poll era in 1935, or two platoon football in the late 50s, where guys stopped having to play offense and defense. It's crazy. People who follow the game today don't even know or understand that at one time, if you left the game in the middle of the first quarter, you could not re-enter the game, period. The substitution rules were such that you stayed in on offense and defense. If it got to the end of the quarter, maybe they would sub you out for somebody else for a few plays. And then when the quarter changed, you were able to go back in and play as long as you could in a given quarter. And you never left the field, offense or defense. And it's kind of like soccer today where they write down, okay, number 4's going off, number 5's going in, and they hold that sign up there. It maybe wasn't quite that sophisticated, but my father-in-law, he played at Ohio University at the tail end of that. And at times in his career, he was on the field playing center and linebacker for Ohio University in the same game. And then they eventually, by 60, I think, had gone to two platoon football where you could have an offensive unit and a defensive unit. And so how do we compare eras and teams over time? I'm going to tell you, in 1995, they were 11-2, and they had guys named Eddie George and Orlando Pace, two of ESPN's top 100 guys all time were on the same team, and they were 11-2. You want to tell me that team wasn't pretty good? Lose at Michigan by 8, lose to Peyton Manning in the pouring down rain game down in Orlando. That team was pretty good. So comparing eras, everybody knows they have 6 consensus national championship teams. And off the top of my head, that's 42, 54, 57, 68, 2002, and 2014. They had a couple splinter championship teams in 1961 where they voted on it before bowl games, and Ohio State wasn't allowed to go to a bowl game that year because of the faculty senate vote. And then 1970, they were voted national champions before the bowl game, and they lost to Jim Plunkett and Stanford in the 1971 Rose Bowl. So they were given a championship. It was kind of hollow when you go out and lose the Rose Bowl. So in the modern era, the teams that were great that would be on this list: 95, 96, 98, 96 and 98 both ended up number 2 in the country. And then Jim Tressel had several. 06, they lost to Florida. 07, they lost to LSU. They were the clear number 1 both years, undefeated in 06, and only 1 loss to Illinois in 07. And nobody else in the country had 1 loss among the major conferences that year. So it is what it is. His 2010 team had 1 loss. They were very good. Urban Meyer's 2012 team was undefeated, but I don't think anybody will confuse them with the 27 Yankees. They were not a dominant team by any stretch. He had very good teams in 15. You have, again, Ezekiel Elliott and Joey Bosa on the same team. lose, what was it, one game that year.
And Michael Thomas, and we could list
Michael
them,
Thomas,
you know,
yeah,
endlessly.
Partridge in a Pear
That
Tree,
team was loaded.
Yeah, that team suffered from a national championship hangover. They weren't all that enthused to come back and play the following year. They lost to Michigan State at home in the rain, obviously. 16, they made the playoff, got drubbed by Clemson. 17, lose at Iowa, bad. Lose at Purdue, bad. And 18, but still, I mean, very good teams up and down the line. And then this 2019 team's got to be somewhere in the top 10, I would think, all time, 13-1. Lost to a great Clemson team who lost to a great LSU team. And as I've said to people this week, it's like those three teams took themselves and separated them from the rest of the nation. There wasn't anybody else at the end of the year that could even make a claim that they deserve to be considered in the same breath with those three teams. They really separated themselves, and none of those three lost to a team outside those three, so it kind of speaks to itself. But again, I think to get to that level, it is such a difficult task, and it begins in January, where they're all right now back to square one, team building from day one, day after day after day, getting through spring practice, getting the things you want to get accomplished, staying injury-free, working hard over the summer, great preseason camp, win that big non-conference game early in the season. You got to win that game in some regards to stay in the hunt. And you think about Oregon losing a neutral site game to Auburn, kind of cost themselves maybe a shot at the national championship this year with the way it all turned out. And, again, it's a step-by-step process. And I say it's exciting. We're 8 months away from the season, and, just all talking about what's going to happen in 2020 right now, and can only speculate at this point.
To me, it was a rough go for that 98 team, because when the dust settled on the regular season and the conference championship weekend for the conferences that had championship games that weekend, you had Tennessee standing at 12-0. Then you had a bunch of one-loss teams. You had 6 one-loss teams. Now, to the eye test and the metrics, Ohio State was the best team in the country other than Tennessee. But there was that crazy BCS formula, and adding Toledo to the schedule based on the Ohio legislature dropped that BCS ranking just a tick, just low enough to drop them to number 3, when you had Florida State, Wisconsin, Arizona, UCLA, Ohio State, Kansas State, all with one loss. Who do you take to play in the national championship game? So I'm not saying that Ohio State deserved it more than the other teams, but certainly they deserved it as much as Florida State, who had to play with a third-string quarterback. And ironically, and this is how the BCS sometimes worked or didn't work, is that Florida State actually had the worst of the losses of all those teams. They lost to a 6-5 North Carolina State team by 17 points, and they got to go play in the national championship game.
Yeah, that was the game Torrey Holt made the comment after the game that the Raleigh police were going to need a few more horses or something that night to contain the rally after the big win. But, I think an 18 playoff would have really fit 98 because there were so many very good teams at the top. And, the ESPN came out with a list of the greatest games of all time not too long ago, and they had Tennessee and Florida State on that list. And I was working at Buckeye Sports Bulletin at the time, and we were publishing our newspaper that night. And we're recapping the Sugar Bowl that had just been played with Ohio State and Texas A&M, and we're watching the game. It was on ABC at that time on probably a Monday night. We're sitting there watching it. It was a terrible football game. I mean, it was just a lot of mistakes, and looked like a lot of bowl games where both teams have weeks to prepare and just aren't sharp. and they turned the ball over back and forth, and it just wasn't a very pretty game. And they put that on the list out of historical significance more than the fact that it was a very good football game. And I was kind of left with the same opinion. If Ohio State was on top of its game, which they were against Texas A&M, they played a pretty good game, won by a couple of touchdowns. That was a team that was really good with Joe Germain and Andy Katzenmoyer and David Boston, Antoine Winfield, some guys that played a lot of years in the NFL. So, you think about it, that was a team that could have been an uncrowned champion that year. I don't know. Again, to win it all, you got to play great football, and you got to also get some really good breaks in your favor. Ohio State had some good breaks in their favor back in 2014, winning in overtime at Penn State, some tight scrapes along the way, and they found a way. Obviously beat Alabama in the semis and Oregon in the national championship game. So breaks went their way that year. They didn't go their way this year, and that's just kind of makes it, I guess, all that more special when you're able to break through and win one. And people talk about, I'm probably going to sit down and write a column about the playoff at some point, and just some ideas and thoughts that I have that would make it better. But I'm not sure bigger is necessarily better. This year, I don't know that there were a 6, 7, and 8 that could have really filled out a bracket. And given any of the top 3 seeds, what I'd consider a great game in a quarterfinal, it would have been a walkover probably for all 3 of those teams, much as LSU's game against Oklahoma was a walkover. So I don't know. I don't know anybody beyond Oklahoma would have matched up favorably on the football field. But again, get on the field, and if a bounce goes the wrong way, you never know what the result's going to be.
And there was a run of years near the end of Woody Hayes' tenure between 72 and 75. And sometimes I get the years mixed up. They beat Michigan every year, and Michigan with one loss was left out of any bowl play. But Ohio State would beat Michigan each year to win the Big Ten championship and put themselves in position to win a national championship all 4 of those consecutive Rose Bowl seasons. Well, one of those years, they lost a very controversial game against Michigan State. There was a play at the goal line. There was some kind of fumble, or I don't remember the exact implications of that game, but they went on to run the table and win the Rose Bowl that year. Then there was a time they went 10-0-1, and they were voted like number 3.
Yeah, there was a pile up on the goal line, and Michigan State basically laid on top of the guys and wouldn't get off and allow Ohio State to run another play. And the time ran out before they were able to run another play. And when they did run the play, the running back, and it may have been Champ Henson, plunged into the end zone for what would have been the winning touchdown. And it took them 45 minutes to sort it out. Maybe the snap came right at the final zeros or whatever it was. And Wayne Duke, the Big Ten commissioner, was there that day, and Woody Hayes cornered him in the locker room in a side cubby hole in the locker room, and threatened him and said, "You're not going to take this away from us." And Wayne Duke's like, "Well, the officials made their decision, and this is what it is, and you're going to have to learn to live with it, coach." And I actually met Wayne Duke, and he had retired probably as the commissioner around 90 or so, and that's when Jim Delaney came on board and followed him, and he'd been there close to 30 years or thereabouts. But Wayne Duke would come to the Big Ten basketball tournament every year, and he got to talking about it one time with some of the Ohio State people about how, Woody, cornered him in this side room and was, borderline threatening him with, "You can't take this away from us." And he's like, "Woody, get your hands off of me. You can't touch me," type thing. And I mean, it's funny stories now, 40 some years later, but I don't think 48 years later, but I don't think he thought it was real funny at the time. So, just part of the lore. He was upset that day. Bo Schembechler was upset a year later when they had this vote after a tie game at Michigan and give Ohio State the nod. I mean, to go to the Rose Bowl, he used the term bitterly disappointed. And of course, his protege, Jim Harbaugh, broke that one out on the JT Barrett call a couple of years ago that he was, quote, bitterly disappointed in how that game ended up. So again, all these things kind of transcend time, and I don't know. It just again, this is what makes football so great. They determine this by and large on the field, and yet sometimes there's some gray area there where we're left years later to argue. Was this a touchdown? Was this the right call? And people are going to be debating things from that Clemson game from a long time to come. But ultimately, the result's all that matters, and Clemson's the one that won the game.
Absolutely. And another one comes to mind against USC, of course, Earl Bruce's first year, that team of sophomores that unexpectedly went undefeated, won the Big Ten, beat Michigan in Ann Arbor on that Todd Bell blocked punt touchdown, and then played a great game against a just NFL team at USC with Ronnie Lott, Marcus Allen, and Charles White, and Paul McDonald, and
Anthony Munoz.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah.
Anthony
Munoz, Joey Browner, and
Yeah.
17-16 game in which they just handed the ball to Charles White like 15 consecutive times in the last drive to win the game.
Yeah, I was probably 12 years old at that time, and I can remember that, like it was yesterday. And Arch Leister throwing the ball to Gary Williams, a big touchdown in that game. And at the end, it was the running back Charles White leaping over the pile, I think, for the winning touchdown at the end. And that's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. What can you say?
Steve, we appreciate the look down memory lane as always. I could do this each and every week, but we definitely do this every week. But we talk Ohio State football typically right here in 2020 with Steve Hellwagon leading the charge from Bucknuts 247 Sports. Steve, we appreciate you stopping by. It's always a pleasure. We appreciate with all that you have going on that you come on here each and every week for us.
Yeah, no problem. I'm sure we will get together again here in the week ahead and see where we're going. We're getting down to the next signing period coming up in February, and Ohio State will have a few of their early enrolling players, plus the two new assistant coaches, Corey Dennis and Kerry Combs, available here for interviews in the weeks ahead. And tomorrow we're going to get a chance to talk to Mickey Marotti, the strength coach, about the off-season program and how that's structured and how they build a team one block by one block at a time and begin that process during this period of the year. So be fascinating stuff tomorrow.
Good stuff. Thank you so much, Steve. We'll see you soon.
All right.